ANC activists and supporters died during the apartheid era after wearing ANC t-shirts that were contaminated with arthritis virus. Apart from that, 200 prisoners of war were systematically eliminated in an operation named the Operation Duel in Namibia and South Africa by the same white government. Biological warfare has become the #1 tool that Europe and the West is using to ravage or ruin by destruction the population of this world. Scientists of evil have been given scholarships to study chemistry in order to use it for the destruction of human beings. They have studied bacteriology and chemistry in such a way that it has harmed a lot of innocent people, especially in the third world countries. Biological warfare, also known as germ warfare, is the use of biological toxins or infectious agents such as bacteria, viruses, insects, and fungi with the intent to kill, harm, or incapacitate humans, animals, and plants as an act of war. Example of this is the dropping of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki by President of the United States of America to Japan that killed almost 226,000 men, women, and children, with many people continue to die from the effects of radiation compounded by illness and malnutrition till today. One of the first recorded uses of biological warfare occurred in 1347 when Mongol forces catapulted plague-infested bodies over the walls into the Black Sea port of Kafar in Ukraine. In the National Security Study Memorandum 200 document dated 24th April 1974 titled Implications of Worldwide Population Growth for U.S. Security and Overseas Interests by the Secretary of the State in the George Walker Bush administration, Henry Kissinger, says the U.S. economy will require large and increasing amounts of minerals from abroad, especially from the less developed countries. That fact gives the United States enhanced interest in the political, economic, and social stability of the supplying countries. Wherever depopulation should be the highest priority of foreign policy towards the third world. In another document, the policy paper titled Rebuilding American Defense by the neoconservatives in their project called the New American Century, on page 60 of the document, it says, although it may take time for the process of transformation to unfold, in time the art of warfare will be vastly different than it is today, and combat likely will take a new form. Advanced forms of biological warfare that can target specific genotype may transform the biological warfare from the realms of terror to a politically useful tool. It is recorded that the former South African apartheid government introduced the use of biological warfare in its project called the Project Coast, headed by the most evil man during our time, the man that forms the center of our discussion today. We are looking at the crimes against humanity done unto the black people of South Africa by the former apartheid government and the failure of the black government to bring those who were involved in this act to justice for the reasons best known to themselves. I am the African teacher on African Eyes Media, and if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please do so by clicking on the subscribe button and be part of this journey, the journey in search of knowledge. To those who don't understand what we are talking about, be there, fasten your seatbelts, as I will break each and every piece of information down so that even he who has no ears to hear must hear. Walter Basson, born on 6 July 1950, is a South African cardiologist and a former head of the country's secret chemical and biological warfare project called the Project Coast during the apartheid era. Nicknamed Dr. Death by the press for his actions in apartheid South Africa, Basson was acquitted in 2002 of 67 charges after having been suspended from his military post with full pay in 1999. Among other charges, Basson was supplied a lethal triple cocktail of powerful muscle relaxants which were used during Operation Duel, the systematic elimination of the Southwest African People's Organization, officially known as the SWAPO Party of Namibia, prisoners of war and the South African Defence Force members who posed a threat to South African covert operations. The United Nations identified the triple cocktail as ketamine, succinylchlorine, a chemical that will cause you to commit suicide willingly if ingested, and tubercularine. In 2021, the revelation that he was working at a Western Cape Med Clinic facility caused consternation and protest against the company. Much of what Basson was working on is still a secret till today. In 1981, when he was working as a personal physician to State President P.W. Botha, the country's Surgeon General hired Basson to form 7 Medical Battalion Group, a specialist unit of the South African Military Health Service. Amongst of his jobs were to collect information about the other countries' chemicals and biological warfare capabilities under the name Project Coast. After his preliminary report, Basson became the head project officer and began to work on the country's chemical and biological weapon capability. He recruited about 200 researchers from around the world and received annual funds equivalent to $10 million US. In 1982, Basson is alleged to have arranged the killing of 200 SWAPO prisoners in dual operation. Project Coast secretly researched chemicals and biological warfare in violation of the international BTWC agreement. Basson created 4 front companies, namely Delta G Scientific Company, Rudeplat Research Laboratory, Protechnic, and Infidel, which in 1989 was split into 2 companies, D. John Trotter Financial Consultants and SafeMed Information Services. The companies were used to officially distance the military from the project to procure necessary chemicals and channel funds for the research. Delta G did most of the research, production, and development of the chemical agents, while RRL developed chemical and biological pathogens and allegedly was involved with genetic engineering. Protechnic was a large nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare plant developing defenses against chemical weapons. Infidel dealt with those on a smaller scale and concentrated on financing and administration of other units and possibly channeling funds between the military and research facilities. Many of the employees were not aware of what they were involved with. In 1980s, Basson and the project were allegedly involved with attacks and assassinations against members of anti-apartheid movements. Leaders in South Africa, Angola, and Namibia also claimed that the more dangerous chemicals were used for crowd control in the country, although the government claimed otherwise and claimed that chemical weapons were used against South African troops. Basson provided the Civil Cooperation Bureau (CCB) with lethal chemicals to be used against prominent anti-apartheid activists. Basson also continued to travel all over the world to gather information about chemical and biological warfare programs and set up other shell and paper companies as additional front companies, possibly for money laundering. When F.W. de Klerk became president in 1990, he ordered that production of the chemicals be stopped and the lethal agents destroyed. Basson concentrated on non-lethal chemical agents and chemicals the government had not banned. That included a large amount of ecstasy and mandrax that were apparently exported or allegedly sold to drug dealers in communities active in the anti-apartheid movement. Most of the stockpile disappeared afterwards. Scientists working on the project later stated that they believe it was to be used to create tear gases. In January 1992, Frelimo troops conducted an operation near the South African border During the course of the operation, they were allegedly exposed to what was thought to have been a chemical agent. Some of the soldiers died during the incident and others required hospitalization. Investigation by the United Nations, United States and the United Kingdom identified it as BZ-Nev agent. US and Britain began to pressure the South African government, and in January 1993, the project cost was wound down. Basson by then was officially retired and hired to dismantle the project, and allegedly profited when some of the South African fund companies were privatized. Later government investigation found that there were large amounts of chemicals and agents missing. In 1993, the Office of Serious Economic Offences began to investigate Basson's business dealings in an unheard of 7-year forensic audit. In 1995, the South African government hired Basson to work for the Transnet, a transportation and infrastructure company, and possibly for other more secretive jobs. The US and UK government suspected that during his visit to Libya between 1993 and 1995, Basson might have sold chemical and biological weapons secretly. In 1995, the government of Nelson Mandela rehired Basson as an army surgeon, allegedly due to US and UK pressure and possibly because the government wanted to keep an eye on him. In 1996, South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission began to investigate the South African Defence Force and determined that the army had probably used lethal toxins against ANC activists. ANC t-shirts were concentrated with arthritis virus distributed to the ANC supporters, exposing them to the disease. In 1997, the CIA told the South African government that Basson intended to leave the country. When Basson was arrested in a sting operation in Pretoria in 1997, he had 1,000 ecstasy tablets with him and also hundreds of secret Project Coast documents in his car. Truth and Reconciliation Commission began to investigate Project Coast, which led them to suspect that Basson had sold his secrets to governments of countries like Libya and Iraq. In the same year, 1997, they asked the help of the Netherlands Institute of Southern Africa, whose investigation report was included in the Truth Commission files. At the same time, the Office of the Serious Economic Offences, the National Intelligence Agency, and the Gauteng Attorney General Special Investigation Team investigated Basson's affairs. Conflict of interest slowed down the Commission investigation, but the Truth and Reconciliation Commission gained more information from Office for Serious Economic Offences. Basson appeared before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Court on 31 July 1998 and gave evidence for 12 hours. While his lawyers constantly interrupted the questioning with legal technicalities, the Commission determined that Basson had been the primary decision maker in the Project Coast and should be put on trial. His trial began on 4 October 1999 in Pretoria. At the time, the South African media had dubbed him Dr. Death. Basson faced 67 charges, including drug possession, drug traffic, fraud, and embezzlement of a total of 36 million rand, 229 murders, and conspiracy to murder and theft. He refused to seek amnesty from the Truth Commission. The prosecution presented 153 witnesses, but the case soon began to turn against them. On October 11, 1999, Judge Willie Hartzenberg dismissed 6 important charges, including 4 charges of murder and possible involvement in the 200 deaths in Namibia, because he stated that the South African court could not prosecute crimes committed in another countries. Basson was also included in the Namibian amnesty in 1989. Hartzenberg then adjourned the trial for 2 weeks. After 18 months of trial, he reduced the number of charges to 46. Basson called only one witness. himself, and in July 2001, Basson began to present his own evidence. Speaking for 40 days, he stated that he had learned about weapons of mass destruction from Saddam Hussein, that he had indeed had free reign in the project, and that he had exchanged information with foreign governments. Technically, all that was legal. The defense argued that Basson should have immunity for anything that had happened in Namibia. On 22 April 2002, Judge Hartzenberg dismissed all the remaining charges against Basson and acquitted him. In his judgment, the judge called the state's case fragmented and confusing, and that it was largely superficial, hoping to convince the court of Basson's guilty in a manner which felt far short of the standard beyond a reasonable doubt. Judge Hartzenberg further added that the state seemed to have decided what the truth was and had argued the court not to believe anything that contradicted the state's version of the truth. What can you expect from a court of dogs presiding over the case of another dog against a cat? The Constitutional Court, South Africa's highest court, overturned the judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal. It ruled that crimes allegedly committed outside the country could be prosecuted in South Africa. Since then, the National Prosecution Authority has not instituted proceedings against Basson for crimes against humanity.